Morning, everyone. We'll get your coffee and juice and get all nestled in here for our speaker this morning. I wanted to say thank you to Jason Schill. He is here with Moments Hospice. He's going to stick around and talk to you and be available for you after our program this morning. So stop by and say hi to Jason. Thanks so much for all you do.
Thank you.
Well, good morning again. I heard that it was raining the last time we had R.O.M.E.O. So I don't want this to become a thing, but I'm glad to see you all this morning. And welcome to those visiting for the first time. And I have a guest speaker here today that has a long and impactful history in the Monona community. He has served in the Monona Senior Center Senior Citizens Committee for several years. Also well known for his 33-year career in Monona as a financial advisor with Edward Jones. For today's talk, we're going to learn more about the Veterans Memorial at R.O.M.E.O Park, the 635 men and women from Dane County who have died in combat since World War I. This memorial was dedicated in May 23rd, 2009. To those who served their country, it stands also to thank families and the community who have supported its creation. So let's welcome Steve Halverson today.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's really an honor for me to be here because with a group of veterans, truly, we owe our freedom to all of you. And that's greatly appreciated for your sacrifice and your commitment to our country. I was told I should speak for maybe 30 to 40 minutes. Reminds me, I talked to an optimist group once and I said, how long do you want me to speak? And they're like, well, Steve, you can talk as long as you want, but we all leave at 1 o'clock. So I'll try and keep that in mind. Now, I personally did not serve in the military, but the entire family did, and so I thought, well, I need to do my part. And so part of what I had done is, for years, I was in charge of the staging for the Memorial Day Parade on Monona Drive. And when you're in charge of staging for the parade, you learn a lot of information that you normally wouldn't need to know. Things like you cannot put camels and llamas next to each other. They just start hissing and spitting. I don't know why. One year they had all these little girls about yay tall. They were part of a dance routine. They had their shoes on. They were way at the back of the parade, and they had buckets of candy to pass out. Well, that was a long parade 20 years ago, and it still is. So by the time I got back to them, half of them were crying because their feet had hurt because of their dance shoes, and the other half, they had buckets of candy to hand out. Well, they were sitting there waiting for the parade to start. They ate their own candy. So the other half had stomach aches, so we had to get a flatbed truck for that. The other thing, everybody, and I mean everybody, wants to get moved to the front of the parade. And I was always very strict with, no, I lined this up for a specific reason. You're here because it makes sense to put you here. Well, one guy said, Steve, I need to talk to you because you need to move me up. And I'm like, okay, what's your excuse? He goes, well, I've got this steam tractor, you see, and I'm low on water, and I don't want my boiler to explode. Okay, you're moving up. You're moving up in the parade. So after I retired from that, the next project was the Veterans Monument in R.O.M.E.O Park. And a little background on that, the biggest supporter of this is the Monona Grow Businessmen, which is a business group that's been around since 1960. Back when R.O.M.E.O Park was first being developed, Mayor Metcalf said, well, what should go into the park? Because it was just a big bare open field at the time. And our group went to him and said, well, we need a Veterans Monument. Clear, and that's just without a question. So Monona Grow Businessmen, we started working on a somewhat modest Veterans Monument at the time. And at this point, I want to recognize our longtime president, John Anderson, has really done a lot for that group and this community. Well, like I say, our original design was a little bit modest, and I talked to the granite guy who said, you should team up with a group from Verona because this is their design. They were having some difficulty on placement in Verona, which is where this was originally going to be placed. Why don't you merge your efforts with the Verona group and make a Dane County Veterans Monument? And so we took our money, their design, their money, worked together, joined forces, and this is what you see today there. It's the largest granite star in the world. Each of these pillars here list people from Dane County killed in action. And we went back, and it includes World War I, of course. Prior to that, the Spanish-American War, is very difficult to get records going back to like the Civil War. But every name that we could get our hands on that was killed in action, that gave the ultimate sacrifice in the last full measure, is listed on these. Around here, and it's kind of hard to see, veterans themselves or their family members can purchase bricks, which is part of what financed this in this entire circle here. This was dedicated in 2009, and just last year we refurbished it. And we still have some work to do, but this is the monument as you see it today. And I think it's a fitting tribute to our veterans there. With that group, I was appointed the #1 fundraiser. And what I found is that people, corporations, groups in Dane County are very generous. That being said, there's lots and lots of really good, whether it's causes or charities, and so there's a lot of folks competing for those dollars on there. So I thought, well, how do I raise money? One thing is I wanted to bring people's awareness, and for those out in the community that do not have your background, bring them some stories on the sacrifice, the different battles of different veterans in different wars. And so I wrote a series of articles for the Monona Community Herald. And I'm just going to read some of these. The first one is on the Normandy Invasion. Most of this is all stuff you already know, but this is what I wanted to impart on the greater Monona community as to the sacrifice of our servicemen and women and why we did this. And these were written back in 2009. All Memorial Days are significant as we honor those who sacrificed for our freedom. This coming Memorial Day weekend holds extra significance as we dedicate the Dane County Veterans Monument on Saturday, May 23rd. The monument honors all veterans and specifically lists all from Dane County killed in action. For the next month, I will write articles that illuminate contributions of our veterans and offer insight to their courage, bravery, and devotion to duty. This week, we highlighted the Normandy Invasion. The greatest amphibious invasion of all time was scheduled for June 5th, 1944. Bad weather caused Dwight D. Eisenhower to postpone the invasion for one day. The invasion started with Eisenhower's order, "Okay, let's go," were his words. Members of the 82nd and 101st Airborne were dropped into Normandy in the early hours of June 6th. Their task included securing inland bridges. As a military operation, not everything went as planned. As intense German anti-aircraft fire broke up the airborne formation, scattering paratroopers as they jumped into the darkness. The consequences of this caused confusion on the part of the Germans, as they could not pinpoint the Allies' objectives. A major goal of the airborne troops centered on slowing and/or stopping German reinforcements from reaching our troops, who would be landing on the beaches in first light. Operations went better than expected on Utah Beach, as most objectives were met by mid-afternoon. Omaha Beach was another story. 67 machine guns raked the beach, decimating the first waves of troops. I went to Omaha Beach and I saw where the gun emplacements were in multi-levels of machine guns pointed at you, and then multi-levels from either side. I don't know how anybody survived going across that sand that morning. When we talk about the bravery in the Civil War where people would just line up and shoot at each other, there's no difference here. There's just, it was incredible. Forward observers directed fire from inland German guns with devastating accuracy. General Bradley nearly called off the Omaha Beach attack upon hearing of the early battle reports. After a brief postponement of the Omaha Beach offensive, subsequent waves of troops found evidence of the tenacious fighting on the first waves. As a result of their success became evident. The most strategic point on Omaha Beach was Point du Hoc. Heavy guns from the point had an arc of fire that could have jeopardized the Omaha and Utah Beach invasions. Army Rangers scaled the cliffs of Point du Hoc, enduring German small arms fire, having grenades dropped on them. After securing the point, the Rangers found that the guns had been moved, the big guns had been moved 1,000 meters inland where they were destroyed with thermite grenades. The Allies accomplished their objective with fewer casualties than expected, yet 2,400 lost their lives in the invasion. Many of those killed are buried in the American cemetery in Normandy. Each cross, Star of David, represents an American who sacrificed his or her life. In March, this is 2009, my father and I had the opportunity to visit Normandy, pay our respects to the fallen, and to imagine June 6, 1944, 65 years earlier. And it was really pretty special because as a Korean War veteran, my dad and the others in the group, they had them present the wreath in memory of those that were lost. And so that was the first article in the Herald Independent. And this is all in anticipation coming up to our dedication here. Part 2 is the Bataan Death March. America's entry in World War II was dramatic and deadly. I believe every citizen has witnessed the film footage of the dastardly attack on Pearl Harbor, resulting in 2,402 American deaths. As the news of Pearl Harbor spread through every state, city, and whistle stop in the nation, the planned invasion of the Philippines had already begun. American and Filipino troops fought gallantly despite inadequate food, medical supplies, antiquated equipment. Large numbers of soldiers were sick and starving as they retreated to the Bataan Peninsula. The soldiers would receive 1 cup of rice in the morning. Then they had to fend for themselves. They consumed snake, lizard, pony, mule, iguana, rats, and monkeys. Once the Japanese got into artillery range, they could, and did, shell the American field hospitals, killing the wounded, the doctors and nurses, and even civilians. Not wanting to see his men slaughtered, Major General Edward King decided to surrender his forces on April 9th. General MacArthur had already been evacuated from danger on PT boats. On April 12th, 1942, the Japanese gathered the surrendered men, some 11,796 Americans, 65,000 Filipinos, and herded them for Camp O'Donnell, some 80 hot and hard miles away. As they marched in the sweltering heat, they were subject to beheadings, cutthroats, casual shootings, and these were the more merciful. Others suffered bayonet stabbings, disembowelments, rifle butt beatings, and were run over or even buried alive. The marchers were denied food and water, even though water was plentiful along the route. Accounts note that many marched for 5 to 6 days with no food or even a single drop of water. An estimated 1,000 Americans and 10,000 Filipinos would not survive the next 10 days. Just devastating. The first day set the tone. Temperatures of 105 degrees, no food, no water, suffering from heat, torture, diarrhea. They had to continue marching. After all, to stop meant they were going to die. Through the march, the Japanese often herded the prisoners into open fields, forcing them to stand for hours in the blazing heat, and this was known as the sun treatment. Those marchers who fell behind found themselves facing Japanese rear guards known as the buzzard squads, who shot any stragglers, and each shot that rang out meant another dead prisoner. Much of the cruelty was rooted in the Japanese code. Very few Japanese surrender. They were expected to die, either at the hands of the enemy or if they were injured enough by suicide. To surrender was subhuman, so they treated their prisoners in a similar vein. The hike, as it was referred to by prisoners, was only the beginning. Once they made it to Camp O'Donnell, 50,000 American and Filipino troops were packed into a camp designed for 9,000. The American side of the camp had just one water spigot, and often, out of sheer cruelty, the Japanese would turn off the water. Sicknesses and disease were particularly lethal because the Japanese stripped the doctors of all medical supplies, even bandages. An estimated 1,600 Americans died in the first 40 days. Eventually, American prisoners were sent to other camps, most notably Cabanatuan, while others were transported to Japan to provide slave labor. They were loaded on hell ships where conditions were even worse than the prisoner camps. Few Americans have sacrificed more than those who endured the Bataan Death March. It is our duty to honor them for their service and remember their sacrifice. And I had an opportunity to honor that service. Every year at White Sands Missile Base in New Mexico, they have the honorary Bataan Death March, where it's a 26.2-mile marathon route. And you can either run it or walk it, or run or walk it with a 35-pound backpack is in the heavy category. And people say, why is it in White Sands Missile Base? Most of the guys that got caught on Bataan and Corregidor were from there, that part of New Mexico. Of course, there was a bunch from Janesville, too, that were there. And so when I did that, this was back in 2009, there was still about 11 actual Bataan survivors there that we got to meet. And they were so appreciative that we would do that in their memory, their honor, and their sacrifice. The first year I did it, I had a shirt made up that had the following words on the back: "To our veterans and those currently serving, thank you for my freedom, a grateful civilian." And I ran past two marchers at mile 6, and a voice boomed out, "Hey son, I appreciate your shirt." And so I turned around and answered, "No sir, you deserve the appreciation." That's what I noticed. It was a 3-star general that I was talking to. So I did that once, thinking, okay, I'm going to run this marathon to honor the veterans, and that'll be it. No, I went back 5 more times, and 3 of them were without the backpack, 3 of them were with a backpack. And so when you're marching through the desert with a backpack, people say, how do you train in Wisconsin for a run in the desert in March? Well, if it's going to be 20 degrees here, you dress up like it's 0, and you're sweating the entire time. And so I would put on the backpack and march from Verona to Mount Horeb and back on the Military Ridge Trail. So, and when you come in on the finish line, medical doctors would look at you and say, you're good, you're good. Then they would ask some people questions, what day is it? And because a lot of folks needed some medical attention after that. Of course, there was a big competition between, the Marines and the Army and the Air. Can't imagine that. So, all right, at this point, I'm going to go to, there's the Korean War one, but I'm going to skip over to Vietnam. War is a terribly personal thing. The impression on the soldiers, their combat experience, their friends and fellow soldiers who did not return. The grief and sorrow from the family members of the fallen, the nightmares haunting the living, and the guilt of those who returned. Forever questioning, why did I survive when so many in my platoon had their lives cut short, forever young in our memories. Vietnam was very personal to me. I remember watching the evening news and the nightly body counts, knowing that if the war continued, I'd soon be old enough to serve my country. Freedom has a price that countless Americans paid for me. Is it my destiny to join the list of those killed in actions that is carved into the granite pillars of my small town's war memorial? Silently standing guard at the cemetery with only the snap of the flags to break the silence. Vietnam veterans hold a special place in my heart. They fought 2 battles, one, the enemy in the jungles 10,000 miles from home, and 2, hostile discrimination upon their return home. They deserve our respect, our admiration, and appreciation, the same appreciation of all veterans. Early on, Americans determined that Vietnam would be a different kind of war where the conventional rules would not always apply. As the late President Kennedy articulated, his quote, another type of warfare, new in intensity, ancient in its origin. A war by guerrillas, subversive, insurgents, and assassins. War by ambush instead of aggression, seeking victory by eroding and exhausting the enemy instead of engaging him. And yet some aspects of the war remained the same. Armies needed supplies. Sever the supply lines and you sever the enemy's ability to fight. This is true all the way back to Alcibiades in the Peloponnesian War, Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan in the Civil War, and certainly true in Vietnam. General William Westmoreland estimated that prior to 1965, 70% of the supplies required by the Viet Cong came from sea and river traffic. By the end of 1967, the Brown Water Navy cut that to a trickle. The Brown Water Navy refers to small gun and patrol boats that were used on rivers which can maneuver rapidly in shallow water. These boats are designed for deep penetration in the murky inland waterways, which are way too shallow for the Blue Water Navy. The Brown Water Navy was first used during the American Civil War. The South needed supplies. The North was determined to sever the supply lines. The Union constructed armored gunboats which could not only stop and sink Confederate supply ships, but they could also lay siege to river forts. Flag Officer Andrew Foote commanded the Union gunboats that attacked and captured Fort Henry and Donaldson. Shortly after that, Admiral Farragut captured New Orleans, and on July 4th of 1863, Vicksburg, the Gibraltar of the West, surrendered, allowing President Lincoln to declare, "The Father of Waters goes unvexed to the sea." The waterways are superhighways for moving supplies, and supplies were vital for the Viet Cong. On December 18th, 1965, for the first time since the Civil War, the Brown Water Navy was reactivated for Vietnam. The mainstay of the Brown Water Navy vessels in the Mekong Delta was the Patrol Boat River, PBR. These boats were propelled by water jets, allowing them to operate in less than 2 feet of water, without the need for rudders or propellers. Another advantage of the PBRs were their fiberglass hulls, which allowed Viet Cong armor-piercing ammo to pass right through the boats without detonating. With their water jet propulsion, PBRs ran nearly silent, were ideal for night operations and making deep infiltration search and destroy operations possible. The other main vessel was small, fast patrol craft, PCF, also known as swift boats. Swift boats had twin V12 Detroit diesel engines with a top speed of 28 knots, could operate in less than 5 feet of water. These boats presented a formidable fighting force, and they were equipped with twin 50 caliber machine guns up front, 50 caliber on the fantail. American military planners knew the tactics to defeat enemy in waging a guerrilla war. isolate him, cut off his supplies, and destroy him. And the Brown Water Navy was particularly effective. The following mission highlights the effectiveness of the Brown Water Navy's ability to deny the enemy vital supplies. PCF 79, which is a swift boat, joined 3 other ships in intercepting a Viet Cong supply ship. The enemy contact, codenamed Skunk Alpha, skunk for unidentified surface contact, Alpha, first contact of the day, changed course and was attempting to escape up the mouth of a river. PCF 79 asked permission to engage the target, was given permission, scored a direct hit with a white phosphorus round on the starboard side of their pilot house, causing the ship to run aground. The Skunk Alpha contained 90 tons of deadly enemy supplies, including 700,000 rounds of rifle ammo, 5,000 rounds of mortar ammo, 1,000 AK-47s. Is just an unbelievable amount of war material that was all destined to be used against our troops. So, one thing about Vietnam, my kind of adopted hometown, which is in Kewanee, Illinois, there was an individual that was shot down in 1972. So of course, this year means it's going to be 50 years since his sacrifice. And so I've been in contact with some politicians in Illinois, and what they're going to do, what I asked them to do, is I said, I want you to fly the American flag over the state capitol in Springfield, and I want that same flag flown over the Veterans Monument in Springfield. Then myself and another group are going to go take that flag. We're going to ride our bicycles. It's about 150 miles, so it'll take us about 3 days. Ride the bicycle from Springfield to Kewanee, present it to the VFW folks there. And they're going to have a dinner in honor of all the people in that area that were lost in Vietnam. And it's hard to believe it's been 50 years, but I think that's a very fitting tribute to their sacrifice there. The last one I am going to talk about is the last in the series for the newspaper that I did. So this article is the last in the series, the countdown to Memorial Day, and I'd like to thank the fine folks at the Herald Independent for allowing me to do this. I contemplated the possible subject for this story. I reviewed the many and varied potential subjects, the wars, different branches of service, the battles, and I've chosen to go a different direction, namely the people. Some of you may know, and some of these you may not know. They are the heroes that live among us, a neighbor, a teacher, a family member. They served our country as citizen soldiers, and when the war was over, they assimilated back to everyday life. In many cases, they have evidence of their heroism, medals such as the Bronze Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Silver Star, Purple Heart. In many cases, they keep the medals in a box hidden in the back of a closet. They are very uncomfortable with the H word, hero. When asked, they simply respond, I was just doing my job. That job was providing and protecting for our freedom. It was not a job that they took lightly. These heroes fought for us on land, sea, and air, and returned to make a great impact on our everyday lives as fathers, uncles, brothers, mentors, pillars in our community, and I want to share a couple with you. I first met James Church in my affiliation with the series of book, The Hero Next Door, which I'm part of. I did not write the book, but I was part of putting it together. There are stories from Wisconsin's World War II veterans, and there's some from Monona in there. Jim is not. Jim's picture graces the cover, and he was the subject of the chapter 3. After Jim graduated from the Portage High School in 1942, he entered the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the College of Engineering. After one semester, he was finally old enough to enlist in the U.S. Army. He heard the call that so many did after Pearl Harbor. He was originally sent to the University of Illinois in Champaign with 150,000 other of the most intelligent recruits. That lasted until the winter of 1943, when Uncle Sam needed every warm body for the planned Normandy Invasion. 20 days after D-Day, Jim stepped foot on the Normandy shore with the duty of a backup rifle company. Over the course of many dinners with Jim and his lovely wife Donna, I learned that the war could also have a lighter side. He told about the 4th of July, 1944. At high noon, every available American artillery piece fired one round, and one round only, to celebrate the 4th of July. His quote, "It apparently confused the hell out of the Germans," he said. He talked about firefights where patriotism took a back seat to the bonds you had with your buddies. How you could not and would not let them down. Jim knew that the war would not last forever and actually carried his math textbook from the University of Wisconsin with him. It traveled through Normandy, through Belgium, through the Battle of the Bulge, and not only did he study the book, he made notations in the margin of his locations at the time. He says most of the notes were taken from the worm's eye view of the war, which is his foxhole. He describes the Battle of the Bulge, how scared everyone was, how they nearly froze to death sleeping out in the cold, the hours of listening to the wounded groans of GI's last agonizing breaths. Jim credits his deep faith in God to sustain him through these and other horrors that he encountered. The most emotional experience did not come at the end of the war, but on the trip back home when their ship passed the Statue of Liberty. He carried his math book all the way through the war, and afterwards his math skills carried him to the degree of electrical engineering, and those skills carried on our astronauts into space when Jim took the helm as Apollo project officer for guidance and navigation. He had daily contact with our space heroes, Neil Armstrong, John Glenn, and fellow Wisconsin native Jim Lovell. So, I love these stories. The second individual I'm going to talk to you about is Bill Schmidt of Black Earth. If you knew him, you would wholeheartedly agree that he's one of the nicest guys that God ever put on this earth. 20 years ago, during my first meeting with Bill, I noticed a photo of him standing next to a B-29. And I said, I've got to learn more about this. And I recall his words. He told me that he was part of the 813th Chemical Company Air Operations. He was stationed on the island of Tinian. Things were pretty routine, doing his job, serving his country, doing his part to win the war in the Pacific, when he related one day the 509th Bomb Group showed up. They built fences around their part of the base, which was highly unusual. We're all on the same team. They would not talk to anyone. Again, pretty unusual. They would go on milk runs with their planes, and their planes never came back with flak or fighter damage. One day, Bill found himself watching the 509th Bomb Group through the fence. They towed a B-29 over a pit and were diligently loading a bomb onto the airplane. Bill thought, well, I hope that's worth all the time and trouble they're spending. And besides, what do they expect to blow up with just one bomb? Well, shortly thereafter, Colonel Paul Tibbets dropped the one bomb over Hiroshima, and everybody knew what the one bomb could do. The photo was of Bill Schmidt standing next to the Enola Gay. The photo can now be seen in Bill's son's store, which is a shoebox in Black Earth. So that is a short rendition of why this monument needed to be built for these folks and for you folks. Especially the ones on these pillars that gave their last full measure. Now, for the veterans bricks, we do have some. I brought some if you're interested. The bricks are $250 if you want to put yourself or another veteran on there. Also, as I mentioned, I'm not the author, but I have financial interests in a publishing company that wrote a lot of books about veterans. One of them was War Through the Hole of a Donut, which is the contribution of the Red Cross all through Europe. And I want to give one to everyone. So, does anybody have any questions of me? Yes, sir.
So, to what degree did, or role did the fire in St. Louis play? I believe it was St. Louis where the veterans' records were kept. How did that influence or impact the memorial?
My understanding is, yeah, we could go back to World War I, but not really before that. And I think that had an impact on, because really, especially like the Spanish-American War and prior to that. And even though Dane County has a huge Civil War history with Camp Randall and everything, we just couldn't get the records going back any further. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think, yeah.
So you were able to get most of the records from World War I to present day then?
Correct.
Because
Yep.
I was interested in researching my uncle's roles and where they were,
Okay.
what divisions and whatever they were. So that's kind of where, because I know that a lot of records were destroyed and
Yeah.
it makes it difficult to research.
If you want to call me with his name, I can try my sources and see if we can help. I can't promise you anything though, because we ran into the same thing. So,
We should talk.
all right. Yes, sir.
Speaking of record searching, you hear about Ancestral.com and sources like that, and like with my dad's history, he fought World War II over in Germany, and mechanized infantry unit, basically the ones that were protecting the tanks, And, I talked to my, my dad's cousin, this would be my second cousin, and he's, drawn some history, and I went to my dad's mod, box of stuff, and what was neat was, the mods would not only write to their son, but they'd also write to other family sons and get letters back, which was, as I read those letters, there's a lot of history that comes through those conversations. And I talked to a lady, I think I was at some restaurant or that, and the lady was going through a whole bunch of, letters, stuff like that, and I says, this looks awful familiar. She says, and she had, letter after letter after letter after letter from other people, and she says, she's been documenting, put those together and stuff like that. She says, I'm pretty much searching and collecting the history and information so people will have this. And I says, where is this going to go? And she says, well, she was, the State Historical Society. And I thought, well, great. And I says, so I made a connection with her to, as I went through some of mine to see if there was any information. And, and I'm sure there's letters like that, or old letters that go way back, or some connection, stuff like that, which makes, my wife always says, what are you going to do with this stuff? And I says, well, you don't understand. I says, not only is there's the letters, but I also have 2 photo albums of my dad. He took a lot of pictures when he was over in Germany with one of these little, fold open cameras, which I ended up using my first 2 semesters at MATC in my photography class. And, he carried that thing around, took pictures when he was, in battle zones or just, pictures of buddies and stuff like that. And, you know, it's either get photo history or you get, you know, written history that everybody has tucked away in some box.
Yeah, and to complement what you're saying, I've been in a Civil War book club for 15 years, and people are like, well, what more could there be about the Civil War? People are discovering old letters and things like that. And even with Bill Schmidt here, he gave me one of the original photos of the Enola Gay. It's not published anywhere. I have it, but it's not in any book. And the same is true with my dad in the Korean War. He was a boiler tender, Task Force 77, Princeton aircraft carrier. So he was either in the boiler room or he was at the very top monitoring the smoke coming out. Well, from there he had his little Super 8, and you could see all these Corsairs coming in and being launched. As far as I know, I'm the only one that has that kind of stuff. So there's always new stuff coming out. Yes, sir.
Just kind of in the category of historical accuracy, I was with a publishing company in Connecticut for many years, and we engaged in creating a documentary with the crew of the Enola Gay.
Oh, wow.
And it was called The Men Who Brought the Dawn. Publishing company was called the Greenwich Workshop.
All right.
And that was a period of time when the Smithsonian, you know, had the nose art of the Enola Gay, very controversial. And there was a lot of depiction of Paul Tibbets and his crew as being real warmongers. There was a great reaction to that. Some people wanted that nose out of there. We don't want to know anything about what happened. And others felt it was an important part of history. Well, we engaged in it, really taking the side of Paul Tibbets, who wanted to tell the story, to set the record straight of what really happened. And I've been fortunate enough to have several dinners with General Tibbets and
Wow.
Fairview Bombardier. And we put together a 1-hour documentary. And it really told it from their perspective of what happened, why they did what they did. And one of the things he said was, you know, we weren't even sure we could get off the ground. This is what he told me.
Yeah.
He said, all we did is we just put the metal, you know, hit it to the floor as much as we could. We got to the end of the runway and we pulled it up. And he said, God damn it, we made it. But he really wanted to set the record straight, as I've said. I'm saying we weren't warmongers. We were doing what the country needed to end that war. Damn it, we did it. And it was just a real honor to have met him and worked with him for a period of time.
What a treasure you have spending that time with Colonel Tibbets, yeah.
If you ever get a chance, The Men Who Brought the Dawn.
Men Who Brought the
Published
Dawn.
in the mid-90s.
All right, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, just what a great respect you have for the man. And he was, even at that age, he was so bright and so sharp and so clear in his mission and what he did. It was just, you know, it made you feel, good. He also talked about the boxcar, which was a whole different story.
Right.
I have quite the respect for that too. But anyway, just an insight into that little bit of history there too.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Yes, sir.
The Vietnam War era is difficult to discuss. I was in the class of 65, and of course we had the draft. We had people going to Canada, and I don't know how many you guys knew Don Heilinger. He was 8 months, or 8 years, I should say, in a Hanoi prison. He was on the county board here.
Yeah, they highlight him in the Veterans Museum downstairs.
Yeah, well, we would have discussions, but it was always hard for me to personally talk about it, because when I was in college, I tried to get in the Air Force, but they were only taking pilots, and I flunked the pilot's test. And so went down and joined the National Guard, the 32nd, and but I always felt that, and of course we were supposed to go to Vietnam, but the war got so unpopular. Johnson said, how can you take people from communities and call up the guards to go to Vietnam, you know? So talking to Don, you know, here you got a POW, you know. And one day we did get to discuss. I remember this discussion, and we had a frank discussion. I told him that I flunked becoming a pilot. Don says, "Don't worry about it, Bob." He says, "I flunked it twice." He went in supply first, and then, you know, he's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin here.
Yeah.
And then I've got another client, and it's very difficult to discuss this. He went to Vietnam, but he had real strong thoughts about going to Canada, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's some feelings of unfairness here. You understand?
Yeah, yeah.
To talk about somebody who's gone and give it, and I in my senior class in high school, and the one next to me, he was killed as a helicopter pilot, you know, and yeah, it's sort of hard to discuss this at reunions.
Right. And that's where when we're going to ride the flag from Springfield up, the VFW guy reminded me that Steve, more than just Marshall Price, died from our class, so we want to honor all 6 of them from that town. I'm like, by all means, yes. So, yeah.
You were talking about that brown water boat that sunk that ship?
Yeah.
Using that round? Well, I was in 8-inch artillery, and we were against our thing to say that we had to call it smoke, because it was against the convention to use that round.
White phosphorus was,
Because white phosphorus would hit here and spread all over everybody, and it would just go right through your body. It wouldn't stop. And we were told, can't say that.
okay,
White smoke.
all right, interesting.
I was wondering when he said that to you, I'm going, I wonder if he remembers, he should have said that. Right?
Point well taken there, yes.
That's one of those things that we were told, you can't say that.
Yeah. Well, I want to, go ahead.
Well, I was just, I presume you have been to the museum in Portage, the one that used to be there.
No.
Well, so this young man, I'll call him a young man, probably in his 40s, didn't serve in the military, but put together a really, I guess, unique collection of artifacts from various wars, mostly World War II. And it was, he had it in a building in Portage. And I heard just recently, though, that he sold it, or he had to sell the museum, basically, or the artifacts. But he had actually the American version of Nuremberg trials, all the
Wow.
that original material. He had, you know, like just incredible. I mean, this young man was so knowledgeable about World War II specifically, and the different artifacts. That's like, I'm like, how, you know, how can somebody, you know, who didn't even serve, and I didn't serve either, but I understand the interest.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, and he had showed this little compass that they would have, the pilots would have or something, that you wouldn't think, they'd take this piece out of their lining of their shirt, and they put it together, and they had wound up with a little tiny compass, so that, you know.
Yeah.
It was just incredible. I guess, from what I was told, I think somebody in either Eau Claire, I think it's moved up to Eau Claire or Wausau. I think it's Eau Claire. But
That was on TV news, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
But-
so,
but
yeah.
This young
Okay.
gentleman, he would take you through his museum, and it was a donation of whatever he wanted, and it was just, he'd go item by item pretty much, and it was just so, he was like a perfect docent, or whatever you want to call it, for any museum, especially based on, you know.
Yeah.
literature. It's like incredible.
Wow.
I was,
Yeah. Yes, sir.
My brother and I are both would-be authors.
Okay,
I've had a couple things published, but my brother did a really extensive research to the extent that he could. He went into the Marine Corps right after he got out of high school.
okay,
And in his later years, he tried to acquire all of the records they could of my dad's war records on a day-by-day basis from the battalion.
yeah,
All of them was just sort of statistics. There wasn't anything necessarily you could draw from it, but you knew the dates,
yes,
and you knew the dates of battles. And therefore, this piece that he's worked on is becoming a historical fiction.
okay,
Part is imagining what he was thinking. There was
Yeah.
a whole series of letters that my mother wrote at the time, and that's going to be published separately as a book entitled Letters from Lillian. And
all
these
right,
are letters from home that sustained his morale and his knowledge about his two boys and so on. As you
Perfect.
recall, that there was a lottery in effect during Vietnam.
mm-hmm,
I was not called up in that lottery, but I was a full-time police officer starting in 1964, and
Okay.
they considered that necessary home front service.
all right,
And I was married and had 2 children, and that's just the direction that was ending up in a career in law enforcement.
yeah. In many cases, just the cards that you're dealt, too, so, yeah. Wonderful. Well, I appreciate each and every one of you folks here. Let me start. Yes. Hopefully we have enough for everyone. You bet.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We already got
Oh, that's right, yeah.
In our library here at the senior center, we have several copies of these books, so if you ever want
You need some more?
I need to get you to sign one of them.
Steve, ever read the book Gallus? Fond du Lac?
Uh-uh.
Decorated soldier in the 82nd Airborne.
That would be interesting.
If you look
So,
on the first page,
Quite a good story.
you got
It's called All
Edward
Eight of
Jones
Berlin.
and Steve.
okay,
Which, what was it, Steve?
perfect. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
God bless you, and appreciate your service.